Dear friends, we are back into the study of the life and spirituality of Saint Thérèse of the Child Jesus. The topic for our today's discussion is love is the foundation of spiritual life. As we all know, Carmel has always affirmed the primacy of love. Saint Teresa of Avila and Saint John of the Cross, the two seminal figures of Carmel, stand as the outstanding witnesses of love. It is only natural, therefore, that the little Thérèse imbibed the spirit of love, primarily from the Carmelite order to which she belonged. Saint John of the Cross, whom she particularly admired and accepted as a spiritual guide, whose works she always loved and cherished, taught her that love alone can repay love, and that it is all important that we fill our lives with the acts of love in order that our soul may be quickly consumed and arrived with a short delay at the vision of God. Such lofty thoughts of the mystic saint captivated the mind and the heart of a little Thérèse that from her tenderest years she yearned to contemplate God in love. In fact, as soon as she was acquainted with these passages of Saint John of the Cross, she began to repeat them to herself in order to stimulate her love for God. One of the most striking features between Saint John of the Cross and the little Thérèse is the foundations upon which they build their doctrine of love, namely sacred scriptures. While John could quote biblical passages with a free flow of lucidity in his voluminous writings on the mystical theology, little Thérèse was fond of St. John and St. Paul. But both of them based themselves on a single scriptural source for their spirituality, that is, God is love, taken from the first letter of John, chapter 4, verse 16. Now, comprehending the love of God as merciful, Thérèse comes to the realization that God bends down to our nothingness to transform it into a fiery love for himself. Having gained this insight, Thérèse wholeheartedly makes it as a life mission of transforming herself into an act of love, to love God with all his own love. Our primary intention in the following reflection is to show that the spirituality of Saint Thérèse is primarily a spirituality of love. It is opportune, therefore, to go through her entire life, from her childhood days till her untimely death at the age of 24, in order to discover the foundations for her spirituality of love. In fact, her whole life, even from her childhood days, can be called a continual act of love. Speaking about her childhood days, when she was just a baby of 5 years, she recounts, "I loved the good Lord more and more. I often gave my heart to him. I did my best to please Jesus in all my actions and was very careful never to offend him." Although, as we know, she was deprived from the love of her mother at the age of 4.5, she was nurtured and cared by her beloved dad and her sisters, two of whom she considered as her mothers. Thérèse slowly transforms a need for human love into the divine love. It is the divine love alone, at the final stage, helped her to transform her entire personality into a beautiful flower in the mystical garden of Carmel. In numerous texts, Thérèse brings out the importance of love in her spirituality. In her autobiography, The Story of My Soul, we read, I understand so very well that it is only through the love that we can render ourselves pleasing to the good Lord, that love is the one thing that I long for. The science of love is the only science I desire. Speaking to her cousin Marie Guerin, she says, I know of no other means to reach perfection than by love. To love? How perfectly our hearts are made for this. Sometimes I look for another word to use, but in this land of exile, no other word so well expresses the vibrations of our soul. Hence, we must keep to that one word, love. Regarding herself, she tells her sister Leonie, I find it very easy to practice perfection. For I realize that we have merely to take Jesus by his heart. Finally, she declares to her sister Celine, merit does not consist in doing or giving much. It consists in loving much. Love was the driving force and objective of all her actions. To this effect, she motivated all her daily activities as acts of love, thereby teaching us how to fall in love with God. To give pleasure to the good Lord, to give him joy that he might be loved. How easy it is to please Jesus, to ravish his heart, she wrote to Celine. To Leonie, she writes, we have merely to love him while at the same time forgetting ourselves. If you wish to be a saint, it is easy. Aim only at pleasing Jesus, at uniting yourself intimately to him. And finally, she takes claim to that fact that Jesus himself, who is our spiritual director, teach her to do everything to love. John of the Cross and Saint Teresa of Child Jesus have a lot in common. What captures our attention while we attempt to read the works of little Thérèse was the influence Saint John of the Cross had on her life and spirituality. As we have noted above, Saint John of the Cross stands for Teresa as her guardian and spiritual director. She thoroughly assimilated the text of John and made them her own with great liberty to nourish her own path. We know that two of her sisters had already entered Carmel while little Thérèse was yet a child. Hence, St. John was not new to her while she was at Les Brusonnets, her home at Lisieux. Fascinated by the writings of St. John of the Cross, we find Thérèse from her childhood and later on during her adolescence, enthusiastically repeating the words of St. John of the Cross, making them as her own. Her famous quote, "To suffer and to be despised for you." After the gospel and the imitation of Christ, it was the writings of St. John of the Cross that she admired the most and personalized them. Concerning the influence of St. John of the Cross, she writes, how many lights have I not drawn from the works of our Holy Father, St. John of the Cross? Let us attempt to glance through a few passages from the writings of little Thérèse that were originally belonged to John, and how she uses them with lucidity for her own spiritual pursuit. The first one. With what longing and what consolation I repeated from the beginning of my religious life these words of St. John of the Cross. It is of highest importance that the soul practice love very much, in order that, being consumed rapidly, she may be scarcely retained here on earth, but promptly reach the vision of a God face to face. We find this quotation in the Yellow Book. In these words of St. John, repeated by Thérèse, expresses her life force, her desire to see God face to face. We find the same affirmation on August 6, 1896, on the Feast of the Transfiguration, during her consecration to the Holy Face, which she made with two of her novices. There is a certain haste and impatience in Thérèse for the vision of God. We will find expressions like rapidly, promptly, hardly stopping here below, all throughout her writings. Sister Mary of the Trinity testifies, a certain passages of the works of our Father John of the Cross delighted her. She quoted them to me frequently, particularly this one. It is of the highest importance that the soul practice love very much. It is true that after a slow preparation, those 10 years from 1877 to 1886, she launches into a race that never slackened, but rather accelerated in the final 2 years of her life. At the age of 24, all was over. It was consummated, won out. She became a shooting star that illumines the heavens with this light. The second quotation that I love to is, the smallest movement of pure love is more useful to the church than all works put together. On September 8, 1896, she exclaims, "Oh my Jesus, I love you. I love the church, my mother. I recall that the smallest act of pure love is of more value to her than all works put together. But is pure love in my heart? Are my measureless desires only but a dream, a folly?" Little Thérèse, while her feet grounded strongly on earth, will never take her sight away from God. She knows the power of grace working in us, and love is the expression of that power. The extraordinary power of love flowing from the heart of God stimulates the extraordinary fertility in Theresa's life. This has been her life motto, and she could say that at the age of 23, that she found her true vocation in the church and in the world. "Oh Jesus, my love, my vocation, at last I have found it. My vocation is love." The third passage that interests me is this. "In the evening of life, they will examine you on love. Learn then to love God as they wills to be loved, and forget yourself." This statement is taken from his book of maxims. This maxim number 70 caught the attention of Thérèse several times. On May 7th, 1896, she writes this text on a holy card of St. John of the Cross and offers to Mary of the Trinity. On the front of this image, St. Thérèse writes, "Through love to suffer and to be despised." This true love indicates the path that she traveled all through her life. Love had invaded everything since her discovery of merciful love and the offering of June 9, 1895. Love is the fundamental reason for accepting suffering and rules out all suspicion of drifting off course in whatever concerns suffering. The fourth passage. "O Jesus, I know it. Love is repaid by love alone." This is another motto that Saint Thérèse made her own. She wanted to work it into the coat of arms that she painted at the end of her manuscript A, in a kind of banner below the two blazons, that of Jesus, JHS, and that of Thérèse, FMT. But she knew this text for a long time, and she had quoted it already on March 12, 1889, in a letter to Celine. Love is repaid by love alone. And she added a passage of stanza 11 of the spiritual canticle of St. John of the Cross. Wounds of love are healed only by love. This phrase is found again in her manuscript B, page 195. That shows this quote was almost a part and parcel of her life principle. Thérèse exclaims to Mother Agnes, "How sweet is the way of love, dear mother. Now all my work is love." In 1894, in a letter to Celine, she writes, "Jesus is pleased to see in the desert, having no other duty but to love while suffering, even without feeling that she loves." The fifth passage. The wound of love is healed only through love. It's taken from Spiritual Canticle, stanza 11. "Console Jesus," she likes, "makes him loud by souls." Jesus is sick, and we must state that the sickness of love is healed only through love. Notice the liberty Thérèse is taking in comparison with her master, St. John of the Cross. She modifies the meaning by reversing the roles. According to John, it is the soul that is sick with love, and whose sickness with love cannot be cured except by the presence and the figure of the object loved. But for Thérèse, it is Jesus who is sick, who is thirsty and hungry for his creature's love. It is wonderful to see how two mystics of the same tradition see the same reality so differently. This is the beauty of the true freedom the mystics enjoy. The sixth passage. The power and tenacity of love is great. Saint Thérèse writes it so beautifully. She says, "Love captures and binds God himself. Happy is the loving soul, since she possesses God for her prisoner, and she is surrendered to all her desires. God is such that those who act with love and friendship towards him will make him to do all they desire. Yet by love, they bind him with one hair." Knowing this and knowing how far beyond her merits it was that he should have favored her with such sublime love and rich tokens of virtue and gifts she attributes to him in this stanza. "When you looked at me, your eyes imprinted your grace in me. For this you loved me ardently, and thus my eyes deserved to adore what they beheld in you." What is the transforming effect of love? What happens when one makes love as the principle of one's life? the beginning and end of one's life, the Alpha and Omega of one's life? The answer is simple. One becomes transformed in love and longs to be inseparable from love. Little Thérèse was no exception to it. At the end of her life, the only desire of little Thérèse was to die of love in the living flame. In her final manuscript, we read, "This is my prayer. I ask Jesus to draw me into the flame of his love." St. John of the Cross has written extensively on this topic, which marks the last two stages of one's mystical life, which he calls the consuming fire of love and the death of love. St. Thérèse went through them literally as John wrote about them. Let us glance them in detail. God is the consuming fire that transforms the human soul. Justly so, Thérèse uses the imagery of consuming love primarily to God. Fire is the first and the foremost, the furnace of Trinitarian love, she says. The divine fire is also Jesus, who is like the burning bush, burns without consuming. Jesus has come to enkindle this fire of love on earth, and his greatest desire is that it consume everything. Thérèse compares God to the sun. Identifying herself with the little bird that can't fly, she dares to fix her gaze on the divine sun, the sun of love. At the center of this sun, she beholds the divine eagle, Christ, the one who takes her upon his wings and brings her into the eternal furnace of the Blessed Trinity. She writes, "One day, I hope that you, the adorable eagle, will come to fetch me, your little bird, and ascending with it to the furnace of love, you will plunge it for all eternity into the burning abyss of this love to which it has offered itself as a victim." Saint Thérèse had the experience of the living flame of love on Friday, June 14th, 1895, while she was making her way off the cross alone in her community chapel, and her heart was aflame. She spoke to her prioress, Mother Agnes of Jesus, about it immediately after this extraordinary experience, and called this grace as the wound of love. Later on, in the infirmary, Thérèse testifies, "Well, I was beginning the way of the cross. Suddenly I was seized with such a violent love for God that I can't explain it except by saying I felt as though I were totally plunged into fire. Oh, what fire and what sweetness at one and at the same time. I was on fire with love, and I felt that 1 minute more, 1 second more, I wouldn't be able to sustain this ardor without dying. I understood then what the saints were saying about these states which they experience so often. As for me, I experienced it only once, and for one single instant, falling back immediately into my habitual state of dryness." Now, what Thérèse speaks about, this fire and sweetness of love, is what Saint Teresa of Jesus experienced in her extraordinary grace of transverbration. It is a special gift of divine love, consuming the heart of his beloved disciple as the reciprocation of their unconditional love for God. John of the Cross explains this phenomenon in the little flame, in the living flame of love, stanza 2. It was this fire that consumed the heart of Thérèse in response to her offering. The Holocaust was entirely consumed. From now on, the theme of fire would become a constant theme for the rest of Therese's life. The entire end of manuscript A, which contains in detail the happy consequences of her act of oblation, evoke the theme of water and fire, an allusion to the wound of love. It is amazing to note how often the theme of fire, of flame, repeated in her poems, especially after 1895. Just a few examples would suffice us. The spirit of love sets me aflame with this fire. Poem 17:2. Flame of love consume me unceasingly. Poem 17:14. Deign to set me aflame with your fire. Poem 26. At a voice my delighted soul is set aflame with the fire of love. Poem 22:12. Mystical theology explains to us that this divine fire purifies all human failings and makes the lover equal to the beloved. In the spiritual canticle, St. John of the Cross explains, in this wine cellar, these herds of imperfections are more easily consumed than are the rust and tarnish of metal consumed by fire. Thérèse had immense consequences from this experience of the fire of love. She writes, "Oh, since that happy day, it seems to me that love penetrates and surrounds me, that at each moment this merciful love renews me, purifying my soul and leaving no trace of sin within it, and I need have no fear of purgatory. I also know that the fire of love is more sanctifying than is the fire of purgatory." It is pertinent to point out that Teresa does not use the symbol of log of wood that St. John of the Cross uses to explain the passive purification of the soul in divine life. She substitutes for it the image of the scrap of iron that desires to be identified with fire in such a way that the fire may penetrate and drink it up with this burning substance and seem to become one with it. St. John of the Cross opines that at this stage, the soul attains a kind of equality with God. This equality is shown in the expression of calling God brother. In calling him brother, the bride indicates the equality of love between the two in the betrothal before the state of spiritual marriage is reached. Saint Thérèse also uses the word brother. I must have a God who takes on my nature and becomes my brother and is able to suffer. Poem 23:4. For you, my divine little brother, I am happy to suffer. Poem 45:6. St. John of the Cross writes, the union wrought between the two natures and the communication of the divine to the human in this state is such that even though neither changes its being, both appear to be God. Spiritual Canticle, stanza 22. Little Thérèse concludes her manuscript with these lines. This is my prayer. I ask Jesus to draw me into the flame of his love, to unite me so closely to him that he'll live and act in me. Finally, the experience of the death of love. The greatest desire of little Thérèse was to die of love. Her last conversations, Mother Agnes of Jesus reports, in the evening she recalled to me the words of St. John of the Cross. Tear through the veil of this sweet encounter. I have always applied these words to the depth of love that I desire. Love will not wear out the veil of my life. It will tear it suddenly. 5 weeks later, little Thérèse, who is a patient now, will say it again. Oh yes, I desire heaven. Tear the veil of this sweet encounter, oh my God. From 1895 onwards, the only desire of Thérèse was to die of love. She composes this beautiful poem, Living on Love, during this time. I want to sing on leaving this world. I'm dying of love. Flame of love consume me unceasingly. Life of an instant, your burden is so heavy to me. Divine Jesus, make my dream come true. To die of love, dying of love is what I hope for. I want to be set on fire with his love. Poem 17, 13 to 15. In fact, even this poem owes a lot to St. John of the Cross. People around Thérèse knew it. As for Thérèse, she had a living flame of love at her bedside and marked some little crosses in the text in pencil. When Mother Agnes inquired about dying of love, she showed the passage marked by her in the living flame of love, where St. John writes, they die in wonderful transports and from delectable assaults until love delivers them. My dear friends, the entire story of little Thérèse is a story of love. Human love for God as the reciprocation of God's unconditional love for humanity. Falling in love and growing in love is an attitude of the heart, which requires to be assimilated and cultivated as one's life principle. Little Thérèse shows us how easy it is to transform oneself as a holocaust of love and be transformed into the divinity of love. This is our vocation in Carmel. It is our history and our heritage. Let little Thérèse help each one of us to appropriate this divine privilege. God bless you all.